Hey, DawgNation. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Yes, a little bit of a late start. That is on me. I had a little bit of a glitch I had to work through there for a second, so I certainly apologize for you on that. But we have a great show planned. Terence Edwards coming up, some very interesting takes from, let's be honest, a little bit of an unsavory character, but very interesting takes about Florida off the top of the program, and I'll explain how that relates to UGA. We'll look at the Georgia running back situation for the upcoming season. I think a pretty provocative question related to kind of how that group is going to perform this year based on kind of what's happened in the past for Kirby Smart at Georgia. A very interesting interview last night with Jeff Sintel and four-star wide receiver coach Joe Antwi, who's now kind of pushing the pause button on his recruitment just a bit. So we will cover all of that over the course of the next couple of minutes. And as I said before, it's really good to have you with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, I want to acknowledge something at the top of the program. We have certainly spent some time this week talking about some of the allegations from Valdosta High School coach Rush Probst, and it doesn't take much of a Google search to determine that Probst's reputation at this point in time in his professional life may not be probably what he wishes it was. He's had some missteps along the way, but when somebody like that says something, it's still kind of interesting. The reason why I bring that up is, at least to a lot of people, of course, the reason why I bring that up is because, once again today, if possible, we're actually going to hear from an even more unsavory character on the show, even more kind of embattled from a professional standpoint. Some of this kind of bleeding into, the legal process and everything else. But I think the opinions you're about to hear, what you're about to hear expressed, I still think has some relevance because I think it probably reflects what the college football world may be saying behind closed doors related to the team that I believe is Georgia's biggest rival, the Florida Gators. The person I'm talking about here is this. His name is Zach Smith. He is a former assistant coach at Ohio State, and a lot of you are aware that Smith had some horrible allegations of domestic abuse against him. I won't go through the whole deal on this because I don't have time to, but it doesn't take much to Google this either to find out that the issues that Smith had even became a very big problem for Ohio State and Urban Meyer himself. Meyer, the big-time coach, was completely kind of tied up in all of this Zach Smith stuff. Smith had some problems, and Smith is, I guess, essentially now blackballed in the coaching world because of some of the stuff that he's had going on allegedly in his personal life. So now Smith is doing apparently exactly pretty close to what we're doing here, which is looking into a camera, shouting into a microphone, and doing some football stuff here and there. And Smith has a recent broadcast, I saw this thing passed around the internet a little bit, has kind of gone into what's going on at Florida and why he thinks Florida is a deficient program. Now, once again, for the moment, put aside the fact that Smith, as I said before, is a very unsavory character that essentially kicked out of the coaching world because of the fact that his personal life was allegedly such a disaster. It doesn't mean that he's lying about this necessarily. And I do think that this certainly provides a window into the opportunity that still exists for Georgia to really take advantage of what is kind of an open door in the SEC East to firmly establish a level of dominance that can certainly set up Georgia for success many years to come because, as you're about to hear from Zach Smith, from the top down, there is just a blind spot in Gainesville, Florida when it comes to recruiting. Let me first of all give you this. Now, let me also say this, that Smith uses a lot of colorful language, the kind of stuff that we don't do here on what is essentially a family program, DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. So I've had to bleep out some of the stuff that Smith says. I also couldn't find my normal bleep, so I had to kind of do a homemade version of the bleep. So it's not the best bleep ever, but at least gets the job done to obscure the colorful language that otherwise Smith was using. So this is former Ohio State coach Zach Smith, personal life allegedly a disaster, but still giving college football opinions. And his opinion is Dan Mullen's got some real problems down there in Gainesville. Let me let you hear this.
Here's what they're not doing well in Gainesville and why I think the University of Florida will always be second fiddle to the Alabamas, Georgias, and LSUs of the SEC, let alone the national landscape. They can't recruit worth it. Dan Mullen was an awful recruiter as a position coach. He's a average head coach as a recruiter, right? He is an average recruiter. And what he did was he filled his staff with a bunch of average recruiters.
So there you go. So Zach Smith, embattled former Ohio State coach, says Dan Mullen's an average recruiter. He's got a staff full of average recruiters, and just really kind of going in on the whole thing here. Now, he says some things about like Ron English and Tim Brewster that I'm not going to play because I think that's kind of almost like borderline racist. It's kind of a weird tact he takes with all of that. But I will give you a couple more examples of what Smith says here. First of all, completely unimpressed with Todd Grantham as defensive coordinator, completely of the belief that Grantham is an example of the kind of below average or simply only average recruiters that Dan Mullen has employed at UGA. This, the former Ohio State assistant, kind of taking Todd Grantham to task for not being a very good recruiter. Take a listen to this.
The guys that I'm really looking at that are, I guess, dragging the staff is Todd Grantham is one. I know he's the D coordinator, but those guys are powerful guys, right? When I worked with Charlie Strong at Florida and even Tom Herman at Ohio State, Ryan Day at Ohio State, those guys as coordinators were impact recruiters because it means more when a kid gets a phone call or is getting recruited by Todd Grantham, the DC, right? He's awful at recruiting, can't relate to a kid, 113th in the country last year, 70th year before. You're talking bad performance.
So I believe when he references those numbers, it's not 100% clear to me, but when he references those numbers, I believe he's referencing where these coaches rank on the list of 24/7 Sports top recruiters in the country. Obviously, no surprise to see Todd Grantham not very high on that list. Another guy who's, I will play this audio for you. Once again, Zach Smith going in on another Florida assistant, this time running backs coach Greg Knox. And he absolutely, at least in his mind, eviscerates Knox for what he's not doing. This is actually kind of funny, even if you don't like Zach Smith. Take a listen to this.
The one that is mind-blowing to me, and the one that I think everyone should be looking at as what the is going on, is Greg Knox, a running back coach. Running back coaches should be your best recruiters. You coach one guy. You really coach one guy on which foot to step with. So I'm not going to say you're not coaching, but you're coaching one guy. If you're not a great recruiter, what is your value? And Greg Knox, 134th in the SEC last year, not the country, the SEC, coaching running backs and recruiting, 130th in 2020. This is a position where you should have an ace, a stud on the trail, just racking in 5 stars, bringing in 7 guys a year. That's what a running back coach does.
So listen, I think if you're a Georgia fan, you probably say to yourself right now, well, we already believe this to be true. In fact, if you look at Florida message boards were kind of reacting to some of this stuff. I mean, most of the comments that I saw from the Florida message boards that I looked at, even Florida fans themselves were like, yeah, that's kind of true about Greg Knox. Knox has been a kind of a punching bag on Florida message boards for a long time. And the stuff about Todd Grantham, Florida fans don't even like Grantham anymore either. And I would say that most Florida fans have kind of come to grips with the fact that Dan Mullen will never be any more than an average recruiter. So if you're a Georgia fan, what is your takeaway from all this supposed to be? If you don't like the source necessarily in terms of Zach Smith, he is a guy that's gone head to head, as he said in this, conversation with some of these guys in recruiting before. So his opinion on this stuff kind of matters, even if he's kind of got an axe to grind with the college football world, which is maybe the reason why he expresses all of that. So the question once again is, so what do you do with all of this? I mean, to me, when you hear this laid out as articulately as it is, even if the source that's speaking these words isn't necessarily the most trustworthy, I think it's a reminder of the open door that truly exists for Georgia in the SEC East. And it's really been true for most of the time that Kirby Smart, has kind of been there at Georgia, that you've had a Florida program that has not been recruiting at the highest possible level. Go back and look at, like, say, the Will Muschamp years. Florida wasn't winning games in the field, but Muschamp, for the most part, was still, bringing in elite talent to that Florida program. He was recruiting at a high level, just wasn't winning enough games. In the post-Will Muschamp world, Jim McElwain wasn't much of a recruiter. Dan Mullen's been better, but not in comparison to the very best programs in the SEC. So if you're Georgia, you've got to understand something. If you want to think about this in terms of, like, decades as opposed to just from year to year, Florida eventually will recruit better because when you look at some of the best recruiting classes that have ever been signed, they've been signed by Florida. The Urban Meyer obviously produced a lot of that. Eventually, Florida will recruit better. Eventually, they will figure it out if Dan Mullen really is no better than average and if he doesn't strive to be any better than average when it comes to recruiting. Eventually, Florida will just bring in a coach that will do better at that. We've quoted Matt Hayes from Saturday Down South, kind of talking about the feeling that exists around Mullen in Florida right now, maybe not as popular in Gainesville as some of the national media might have you believe, or maybe themselves believe about Mullen, because a lot of Florida fans are frustrated about the current nature of recruiting. That means for Georgia, the time is now to put some distance between yourself and the Florida program. And yes, last year Georgia had some injuries. Georgia wasn't settled at quarterback yet, and a bunch of other reasons. Florida sort of steps up, wins the SEC East. You can't have that happen again. That's one of the reasons why we do Gator Hater Countdown here on the show, getting ready for that Florida game coming up in October. It's not just important because it's revenge against a rival. It's also important because it sort of establishes the necessary cushion between Georgia and its next best competition in the SEC East. We heard just a moment ago Zach Smith, the former Ohio State assistant coach, say, as long as Florida's recruiting this way, they will always be second fiddle to teams like Georgia in the SEC East. Well, I believe that Georgia's job this upcoming season is to make sure that actually is true, to perform in such a way that Florida truly is second fiddle. And you don't let Dan Mullen find a new quarterback in the post-Kyle Trask world. You don't let him find a new playmaker in kind of the post-Kyle Pitts, Kadarius Toney world. You don't allow him to establish anything like that. We just heard, Greg Knox get kind of ripped for what he's not brought in there at the running back position. You don't let Florida establish a running game this year. Don't let Bowman, the transfer from Clemson, come in and have any kind of success. DeMarcus Bowman. Don't let that take place. That when you look at what Florida currently isn't right now, I think it's Georgia's job to make sure they stay that way. I think it's Georgia's job to take advantage of, frankly, what is a little bit of a soft SEC East here in 2021, soft in part because of the fact that Florida, as Zach Smith says, just simply doesn't recruit very well. So you may not like the source. Zach Smith's obviously had his share of personal problems. You may laugh at his opinion about Florida, which I certainly understand why you would. But take it seriously enough to know this, that it's Georgia's job to make sure that remains true. And it's Georgia's job to take its advantage in the talent column and really use that to get a big win against the Gators in Jacksonville later on this fall. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us, no matter how you get to us today. Presented today by our friends at Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. And we're available on all kinds of platforms, whether it be video, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast form on the Apple Player, the Google Player, Spotify, worldfamousdognation.com. However you get to the program, thank you so much for being with us here today. And as I said before, big thanks to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp for making it all possible. The divorce process is a scary and confusing thing. And it's the kind of thing that nobody obviously wants to go through, but let's face it, statistically speaking, in an audience the size of ours, unfortunately, some of you are either about to go through this, going through it right now, have been through it before, and for those of you that have been through this before, hopefully you had a strong advocate on your side. But for those of you who are about to do this, in the midst of this right now, let me please give you this encouragement, that this is not the kind of thing that you want to go on your own. You deserve to have someone who's well-versed in all of these things, who's tenacious when it comes to fighting for you. You deserve to have that person on your side. That's what Merriweather and Tharp can provide. So please check them out online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. Website, once again, theatlantadivorceteam.com. As I said before, they're your source for Georgia divorce. You can get that initial consultation set up, talk about the specifics of your situation, and then after that, they'll become your advocate, and they'll advise you every step of the way. But the first step belongs to you. Check them out online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. It is Terence Edwards here coming up in just a moment. Before that, I do want to go around the doghouse, and I want to focus for something, and I want to focus on something for a moment that we'll probably talk a little bit now about and talk even more about in the days to come. Very interesting conversation the other day with Georgia running backs coach Dell McGee. And I've been thinking a lot about what McGee said during that press conference. And I want to start with something that our buddy Mike Griffith asked McGee with the seniors returning. With Zamir White coming back, when some people maybe thought he would have tried his hand at the NFL, with James Cook coming back, even though maybe some people thought he might have tried his hand at the NFL. Georgia bringing back these seniors for this upcoming year. What does the presence of those guys, the experience they have, what does that mean for the competition for playing time within this Georgia running back room? What does that mean? And how much does the fact these guys have played more matter when it comes to who'll play the most and get the most carries this upcoming year? This is pretty interesting from Dell McGee. Take a listen to McGee's answer to that question.
We don't necessarily play seniority with any of our players. That's why we have off-season workouts. We have spring ball. So a lot of our evaluation and kind of setting the depth charts will kind of come from how they perform day in and day out leading up to the spring game. So it's a constant battle with our guys at the running back position. We are very, very fortunate to have 6 guys that can actually help produce and play winning football for us.
So I think it's really interesting. And if you look at the history of Kirby Smart dating back to his first year at Georgia in 2016, one of the things you see is what Georgia has this year, 2 senior running backs. That's actually a little bit of a rarity during the Smart era. There have only been 3 senior running backs since Smart became head coach to get 100 or more carries in any season for UGA, and 2 of those came in the same year in 2017 when obviously both Nick Chubb and Sony Michel did that. And if you look at the track record between Chubb, Michel, and the other 100 carry back as a senior in 2019, Brian Harrigan, what you see is a little bit of a mixed bag of results, right? So in Chubb's case, he was obviously way better in 2017 than he had been in 2016. And the large assumption on that is he was simply healthier than he had been before. He sustained an awful injury in 2015. That took a while for him to recover. He was a 1,000-plus yard rusher in 2016, but even better in 2017. A lot of that we explained by injury. However, in Sony Michel's case, he wasn't quite returning from injury much the same way. He was also way better in 2017 compared to 2016. Much higher yards per carry, better overall production all the way around. He was just better as a senior than he had been as a junior. On the other hand, Brian Harrigan admittedly probably wasn't quite as good with more carries in 2019. His carry total went way up in 2019 compared to where he'd been as a junior in 2018, but his yards per carry number kind of actually went down. So you have 3 seniors who played a lot of football for Georgia as running backs. 2 of those guys had very big senior seasons in the case of Chubb and Michel. One of those guys, in Brian Harrigan's case, probably did not perform quite as well during his senior year. But the one thing you also saw during that season, as McGee said, we're not going to put a lot of faith and stock necessarily into seniority. You kind of saw the junior DeAndre Swift carry numbers kind of going up as that season went along. He got 20-plus carries 3 games in a row, kind of in the middle portion of that season. The Brian Harrigan numbers, at least a little bit, kind of went down, even though there was kind of some parity between those 2 guys near the beginning of the season. So certainly I take McGee at his word when he says we're not going to value seniority too much when we look at who deserves to get the most carries for Georgia this upcoming season. But in the case of a guy like Sony Michel, Nick Chubb to a degree, but a lot of that was injury-related. In Sony Michel's case, there is also the possibility that one of these 2 seniors, maybe both of them, maybe both Zamir White and Brian Harrigan, Brian Harrigan's not on this team anymore, Zamir White and James Cook. Between the 2 of them, the odds that one of them really explodes on the scene and has a much bigger year in 2021 than maybe the junior season in 2020 would have predicted, there is some precedence for that here around UGA. It's Around the Doghouse here on our program. Before we get our buddy Terence Edwards, talk to him today, let me also give a quick shout out to my friends at Marlowe's Tavern for a great event that's ongoing there. Make sure you check out their Bayou and Bourbon event. Chef John Metz has done a terrific job really putting together some unbelievable items, menu items, celebrating the great flavors of Louisiana. You think about Mardi Gras, you think about the New Orleans Big Easy type stuff. It's all there for you on the menu at Marlowe's Tavern, the Bayou and Bourbon event. Obviously, great cocktails. Marlowe's is famous for that. Really great flavors on that. So make sure you check that out. Whether you're talking about the Nolan style po' boy, the chicken and shrimp gumbo, that's incredible flavors there as well. And for dessert, don't forget that honey bread bourbon pudding there as well. really incredible flavors there at Marlowe's Tavern. So if you go to marlowestavern.com, you can check out the menu and all of that, see all the great things that Chef John Metz has picked out, and you can do all of that today. All right, before we're done, we're going to hear from four-star wide receiver Kojo Antwi. Made a great appearance with Jeff Sintel last night. Very important update on his recruiting. We'll talk about all of that. But for now, for everything going on around UGA, Dogs getting ready for spring practice. Great voice to hear from on that. Former UGA wide receiver Terence Edwards. Let's do that right now. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And I'll say hello to Terence Edwards. Always love having Terence on the program. Great job that he always does. And Terence, if you don't mind, I want to kind of pick up right where I was a moment ago. When you look at the pecking order for Georgia at running back right now, the couple seniors coming back, James Cook, Zamir White, a lot of folks wondering how much better they can be in their final year at UGA. But there's also kind of that curiosity of, hey, you'd like to see more of Kendall Milton, see what he brings to the table. Kenny McIntosh has his fans out there. I thought that Dejon Edwards really played well when he got a chance to show what he was all about a season ago. And then you think about Lavassier Carroll, either maybe as a running back, the position that he's recruited at. There's also been some reporting that he's trying his hand at defensive back here at the moment there as well. How do you kind of handicap this race for playing time among these Georgia running backs here at the moment?
Oh, that's a great problem to have. I mean, we got a lot of talented guys, and we're deep. So that's a great thing to have. Coach McGee's going to try to, I guess, give the carries where the carries is needed, depending on the situation. I got to give Zamir White some love. I was hard on him at the beginning of the season, not knowing that he was a little banged up. And once he came back, he done a great job. And I think James Cook is the guy that I predicted that we needed to get the ball in space, and we did. So I expect those two to have really big years. But I'm really excited about Kendall Milton and McIntosh. I honestly think Kenny McIntosh is the best career running back we have on the roster. So we have a talented group of guys that we're going to need at some point to win games.
So let me ask you about Cook in particular, because I think you're like a lot of people, what you just said there of, wow, there's so many creative ways you can use James Cook. He caught like an 80-yard touchdown against Alabama, as a for instance. But, Cook's also a guy that thinks about the NFL future there as well. How much do you think, whether it be James wanting to do this or Georgia wanting to do this with James, how much do you think they're going to look to use him as kind of a traditional running back going between the tackles? And how much of his weaponry this year will be about kind of doing those non-traditional things, being a guy that catches the football, being a guy that's kind of used in that way? Do you see him at this point in his career more of a true traditional running back or someone who's maybe more of a hybrid?
I think he's a hybrid. I don't think we would be doing him a disservice if we just try to bang him up the middle on any type of zones or outside zones, inside zones. I think his skill set is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. You got to use him in multiple ways just to get the best out of him. He isn't the biggest guy, but he's bigger than what people think he is. He's a good stout, 190 pounds. So we need to use him as a Swiss Army knife more than just a down here to try to bang between the tackles in an inside zone or outside zone.
So let me talk to you about, the other senior there for a moment, Zamir White. And I was kind of referencing some of these numbers before you joined us. Let me give you Sony Michel as an example on this. I could mention Nick Chubb, but Nick Chubb was truly recovering from injury. Maybe Zamir White, as you said before, is still doing that. Maybe he's not. But let's just use Michel as an example here. So in his junior season in 2016, he had 840 yards rushing, and he averaged 5.53 yards per carry on 152 carries. Senior season, 156 carries, so a similar number of carries. He goes up to 1,227 yards, and he averaged 7.87 yards per carry. He also had 16 touchdowns in 2017 after having just 4 in 2016. So he was way better as a senior than as a junior. Terence, I know you weren't a running back, but your brother was, and you obviously played and had a great senior season yourself. If you had to guess how it is that a senior running back like that could be so much better in his final year than he had been the previous year as a junior, similar number of carries here, by the way, why in Sony's case was he that much better as a senior if you had to put your thinking cap on and guess?
It's a lot of things. The O-line play comes into play. The passing game comes into play. There's a lot of reasons where a guy numbers can skyrocket from one year to the next. I don't think he became a better player or a worse player it just became that team was just special, and it clicked on all cylinders. And you look at Sony, you look at Nick. I mean, you just look at that team in particular. Every guy on that team raised their play that year, and I think it started in that summer after their junior season that they just put in their minds. The leadership on that team just put in their minds, we're going to come back and we're going to do this and end our career at Georgia the right way. I just think it was a mindset more than anything that seniors and those leaders put into mind that we got to finish our career strong, and they put the work in to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's a really good point, actually. Let me shift gears, talk about something different here for a moment. We've seen a few of the high-profile Georgia recruits on both sides of the ball, or at least I should say Georgia recruiting targets, not necessarily UGA commits, but Georgia recruiting targets. It seems to be a recent trend the last couple of days of kind of pushing the pause button on that recruitment, pumping the brakes, if you will, with commitments that were supposed to take place, and now they've been kind of postponed because of, I believe, the belief here is among a lot of these recruits, they're about to get a chance to start taking visits, and obviously they want to utilize that as a part of their recruiting process, which I can totally understand. But my question to you, though, Terence, is because you do work with so many recruits and, you kind of are a part of these conversations with them, what is the attitude right now? Is there optimism among recruits that the dead period's about to be lifted, that they are going to have a chance to take some official and unofficial visits? And I guess what's the reception like that on the part of these recruits, knowing that there may be on the horizon a little bit of a return to some kind of normalcy when it comes to all of this?
Oh, I haven't heard anything from the guys that I train and talk to about dead period being lifted. I know a lot of them are actually kind of, having great relationship with coaches, and I think it's even stronger compared in the past because the only thing they could do now is kind of Zoom meetings and Zoom tours, so they're getting more of the coach than actually learning about the facilities and the academic parts because they're not on campus. They're not getting a feel how these guys say, I got a feel once I walk onto campus. It's just a little different times right now. So, but I can't wait for these guys to be able to get back on campus and experience some of the things that I experienced coming up as a young athlete, just being able to see these coaches in their environment on campus, being able to talk to the players, being able to talk to some of the kids that are already on campus, that students are not athletes, just having the whole experience of taking an unofficial visit to these schools that a lot of these kids are not being able to get the opportunity to.
And we should remind folks, I think you and I have talked about this before, you go back and look at the class of 2021, their senior year may have been taken from them in terms of being able to take these visits, but a lot of those guys were pretty prolifically visiting as juniors. But they're guys in the class of 2022 because, they're now moving into their senior year after having this taken from them last year. If you're a somewhat late bloomer, there are plenty of guys in the class of 2022 that haven't been able to visit anywhere at all. And so while the class of 2021, I'm guessing, may have felt okay about their decision because at least they had some visits to lean on, there are 2022 guys out there, right, Terence, who've really never been able to visit anywhere, and I would imagine that does make for a pretty tough decision for them.
Right. You're absolutely correct. That some of these guys are been on campus since 7th, 8th grade. That's how early that they're recruiting these guys now. But you have some guys that are late bloomers that haven't really had the opportunity to really embark on what it means to take unofficial visits and being able to be the top dog on campus, being able to have the attention of the coaches. Yeah, you might have been there and just one of the 100, 200 kids that are at a game, but you didn't get the full experience. So now you just got to rely on your research. You got to rely on sitting down and praying about it. You got to rely on your parents helping you make an educated decision now. You just can't go and get that feeling anymore that a lot of kids talk about. I got a feel, and I knew in my heart this is where I want to go. It's going to do a lot of soul searching these days.
Let me bring up another player here for you for a moment, and you obviously love pass catchers. And, Terence, there's a lot of growing expectations for Darnell Washington, the Georgia tight end. We've talked about that on the show some here this week. What did you see from Washington as he kind of came along last year? He's obviously got incredible physical characteristics. He's a huge guy and a very athletic player to be as big as he is. He was also a target of the Georgia offense more by the end of the season. How good do you think Washington can be as a tight end, and what did you see from him last year that kind of gives you a glimpse of that?
Honestly, this is going to go out and probably be a shocker to everyone. I think he's probably going to be the most important part to this offense this year. When you have a guy that has his physical abilities, we have to be able to control the middle of the field with a 6'8", 270-pound tight end that has true natural pass-catching ability. He's a matchup nightmare. We got to figure out a way to get him more targets. And once he and defenses has to scheme for him and put more attention on him, that's going to open up the running game. That's going to open up the guys on the outside, because now you cannot use the safety to cover George Pickens. You cannot have a safety covering Jermaine Burton. Now you're going to rely on a linebacker solely or a smaller defensive back trying to cover a guy who can control the middle of the field. He's going to be an important part of the puzzle offensively if we want to be where we want to be.
What I was talking about the other day, Terence, is you look at some of the draft talk around a guy like, say, Kyle Pitts, and the possibility, at least some analysts would have you believe, that Pitts could be taken ahead of guys like Jamar Chase and Devontae Smith and some of these great receivers. You know, whether you believe that should be true for this draft or not, it does give you a glimpse that if you have a great tight end, as you said before, he can be as valuable, maybe even in some cases more valuable, even than a great wide receiver because of all the ways in which you can impact an offense. Is that right?
Oh, most definitely. Like I say, most great tight ends. Pitts was a matchup nightmare. I had that opportunity to work with him a few times this summer, and I was blown away of how athletic and how smooth and how just gracefully he catches the football. And Darnell is not that type of guy, but his impact can be the type what Pitts had for the Florida Gators. He opened up everything last year for the Florida Gators, and that's the type of impact I would like to see Darnell Washington have this year, not in the same way because he's not the same player, but being able to just being mismatched against smaller defenders and bigger linebackers. And we just have to use him to create mismatches that lead one-on-one coverage on the outside.
Let me squeeze in one more thing before I let you go, and you're always gracious with your time, and I certainly appreciate that. We had one of your teammates, David Pollack, on the show yesterday, and David was talking about how if you're JT Daniels, you've got all these great weapons, you know, guys like Darian Smith and George Pickens and all the guys that you and I talk about all the time, that should be, in case he believes it probably is, extra motivation for all these guys to kind of work with each other during the winter leading into the start of spring practice. That they're out there, you know, getting some of that, you know, player-led stuff and all the things that goes on there. Obviously, someone like me never gets a chance to see anything like that. Most of our audience is kind of in the same boat on that. Would you mind giving me a little bit of a description? If Daniels is working with these guys as a lead into the start of spring practice, exactly what does that kind of look like, and how do they make use of that time in those kind of voluntary situations?
So right now, the coaches can't be with them right now. Once a ball is on the field, the coaches cannot be around. So this is a player-led, most likely quarterback-led 7-on-7s and routes on there. So he may just get a script from Coach Monken, and these are the things that we want to work on today. It may be the installations that they've been putting in for the first week of spring practice. So they're just out right now just getting their timing down. They're doing some slight one-on-ones where the defensive backs and the receivers are going one-on-one against each other. Then they're doing 7-on-7. They just hear just a precursor of what they're going to do in the spring, but it's led by players only. This is a time where it's serious because there's no coaches, and the leadership on the teams right now really have to orchestrate and organize these workouts. And it's voluntary, so you don't have to come. But if you're really serious about your craft, and more times than not, everybody's there just working on their game and trying to understand the offense better and what they're going to do to start of spring.
Well, speaking of understanding the offense better and understanding your position better, that's obviously, Terence, something that you do for that next generation of pass catchers, guys doing big things at the high school level, moving on to the next level there as well. So remind folks how they can get in touch with you. I know that you've been, as you like to call it, the bubble. You've been in that bubble this week working hard with folks. How can they be a part of all of that?
If you want to be a part of what I call the bubble work, you can reach me on all social medias. That's Terence Edwards, Wide Receiver Academy. You'll see TEWR Academy on all social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So
I see you mention this all the time. This is probably a dumb question, but why do you call it the bubble?
Oh, because it's shaped like a bubble.
Oh, okay.
That's plain and simple. If you look at the picture, if you just look at it, it's just shaped like a bubble, so we just call it the bubble.
Well, there you go. That makes a lot of sense, even to someone as dumb as me. Terence, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. I'll look forward to talking to you here very soon.
Thanks for having me, BA.
Good stuff.
take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really, really good stuff there from Terence Edwards. And as I said before, what he brings up about the running back situation is something I do want to unpack a lot in the days ahead, because I do think there's something to kind of be learned for this. Because when I look at the running back situation in Georgia, and around these parts, we don't play favorites. We want the team to do well. I'm not going to kind of pit players against each other. So when you look at like Zamir and James Cook and Kenny McIntosh, you heard some very strong words of praise for McIntosh from Edwards a moment ago. That's really interesting. Kendall Milton, who I've loved going back to the time, even when he was like a junior in high school, I've always been very impressed with Milton. I think he has a real chance to shine at UGA. But when you think about who it's going to be this year, I mean, my mind does kind of keep gravitating back towards these seniors. And, looking at that year that Sony Michel had at Georgia in 2017, once again, discounting the Nick Chubb year a little bit because of the fact that so much of his improved play year over year may have been related to injury recovery. And who knows? Maybe that is a good comp for Zamir White, because he obviously had the 2 knee injuries going back to a couple of years ago. But in Michel's case, it seems to be an example of a player who is just better. Similar number of carries, but way more yards per carry, way more touchdowns, way more yards overall. And as Terence Edwards kind of points out, there are a couple things to keep in mind here. He says, first of all, it's an offensive line thing. And there's no doubt, for Georgia fans who have pretty good memory of a few years ago, Georgia from an offensive line standpoint was way better year over year, 2017 compared to 2016. There's no question the Georgia offensive line was much better in Kirby Smart's second season than it had been in his first. I think that's true. I think level of competition also matters here. If you'll remember in 2017, Georgia won every game in the SEC East by at least 2 touchdowns. So Georgia was coasting in division play. Georgia was obviously handling its business for the most part outside the conference there as well. So maybe it was a very good Georgia team beating up an inferior competition that allowed Sony Michel to really thrive that year. But when the competition got stiff, think Rose Bowl here for a moment, Michel, obviously validated himself on a big stage against good teams there as well, so you can't say it was solely an example of feasting on inferior competition. My only point here is this, and we'll probably examine all of this in days to come, is there is precedent at Georgia for a junior who was good becoming a senior who was great. Michel is now kind of in the all-time category, not just of fan favorites, but of, kind of single-season performers. People put that 2017 year because of what it led to for UGA. They have a tendency to put that season on the shelf, and I think they should. And it was not necessarily predicted based on what he did in 2016. He'd been a really good player in 2015 when Chubb was hurt, a good player in 2016, but really became a great player at Georgia in 2017. So at least keep that in your mind as a higher threshold of achievement possible for these Georgia senior running backs as they return for 2021. I'm sure we will examine that a whole lot more. Interesting story, AL.com, over the course of the last day or so about a Auburn staffer. This is kind of confusing to me. This is a guy that worked in the kind of like the academic part of the program, who there was an alleged grade change for an Auburn player going back to a couple of years ago, and something about this guy not reporting it led to him being fired. Frankly, when it comes to the grade change itself, it doesn't necessarily seem like the grade change was all that nefarious necessarily, at least based on what I read from AL.com. And maybe my reading comprehension is not strong enough, but it wasn't obvious to me that there was a crooked reason that the grade had been changed, but somehow there was a grade change issue, led to this guy being dismissed. Now he's suing Auburn for what he believes is kind of a case of gender and racial discrimination. He is a black man, and his 2 superiors are white females, and so that's kind of led to an issue there. And it's true, this is kind of a complicated deal. I don't know how much it matters for Auburn football, but AL.com has reported on this within the last day or so. That is going on there. Probably worth keeping your eye on a little bit. A much more fun, happy topic is there's been some leaking out as of late that we may actually now have a date for when the EA Sports college football game may return. Looks like 2023 here based on some of the chatter that's been online, that we could be playing EA Sports college football again by 2023, which a couple years away, but frankly, maybe not quite so long to wait when it comes to folks having a chance to play that game again, which I know a lot of folks are really wanting to do. Couple 5-star recruits on the move here as of late, and they both have Alabama ties. The one most prominent here is Antonio Alfano, You may remember Alfano signing with Alabama, 5-star defensive lineman, pretty impressive guy. Ended up kind of going out towards Colorado, obviously around the time that Mel Tucker was there. Tucker's now at Michigan State, and Alfano is apparently on the move again. He's putting his name back into the transfer portal. And listen, it goes without saying, the reason why you have to recruit a lot of 5-star players is because they're never all going to work out. In Alfano's case, it just seems like he's had a hard time finding and feeling at home anywhere. And frankly, I have a little bit of sympathy for guys like that who find themselves in that situation. Choosing the right college is tough, and choosing a place where you're going to thrive, especially with the whole world telling you what you want to hear every single moment of every single day, I think that's pretty tough. In Alfano's case, he just quite hasn't had that work out in his favor, and I guess he's now looking for a new home again. And boy, you hope that he doesn't get caught up into what has been such an issue for so many in the transfer portal as of late, which is you kind of get in there. As it was reported the other day, there are about 3/4 of the people in the transfer portal right now who have nowhere to go once they get there. And that's the real problem is, you think, well, I'm going to go to the transfer portal. Grass is always greener somewhere else. But sometimes you get in the portal and you find out there is no somewhere else, that you don't quite have that landing spot, that home that you want to go to. Another guy like that also has some Alabama ties is Ali Cahoe. That was the linebacker from the state of Washington who has bounced around a little bit. I think he was at Utah for a minute. Now he's transferred from Utah to UCLA. So a little bit of movement with former 5-star recruits who have some ties to the University of Alabama. I want to finish the SEC through with this. This kind of got some attention. Chris Hummer reporting for 24/7 Sports. We finally have like an official, reportedly to add to the rumors involving Darian Kendrick, the former Clemson defensive back. We have largely assumed that Georgia was in the mix for Kendrick, but that's based on just kind of logical assumptions, educated guesses, given the fact that he's a good player. Georgia needs experience in the secondary. It seemed to make some sense. Hummer, though, can now give you Georgia officially, at least according to his reporting, in the mix here. He also mentions Alabama, Florida, Texas, TCU, in the mix here for Darian Kendrick. So now we can have an official report, this from 24/7 Sports, that says, yes, Georgia is pursuing Darian Kendrick. It's not a surprise. That's pretty much what most people thought Georgia was doing anyway. But now there's this report here. Obviously, in the case of Alabama, the other school that's kind of mentioned here, remember, Alabama is much the same way with Patrick Surtain Jr. and secondary guys now out of that program. Alabama kind of also has a need for experience in the secondary, much the same way that Georgia does. So in this case, Georgia not the only of the big-time power programs who sells the need for experience. Alabama can also sell that too at the moment, and they are, of course, red hot on the recruiting trail. We'll see if that extends to Kendrick here, the transfer from Clemson. But Georgia, mentioned with a host of other power programs for the former Clemson DB, we can now add an official report to what has been largely our assumptions based on all of that. It will make that your SEC through. I want to let you hear from 4-star wide receiver Kojo Antwi in a moment, an important update on his recruiting. Before we do that, let me give a quick shout out to my friends, though, at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. They bring DawgNation Daily to you in part each and every week. We always love shouting them out on Tuesdays. But I want to remind you, they're also a great resource for you to turn to for any of your foundation waterproofing issues. They got 2 full-time engineers on staff. They're proud partners of UGA. They're great to do business with. Make sure you put your trust in them. If you see those wet spots showing up when it rains, or if you see those cracks showing up in your foundation, go ahead and reach out to them because they've been good friends of ours for a long time, proud partners of UGA. You can give them a call, 678-ESOG now. Very easy number to remember, 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, so last night on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, great interview with 4-star wide receiver Kojo Antwi from Lambert High School. And Kojo, as we talked to Terence Edwards about a moment ago, was another one of these guys that was seemingly getting pretty close to a commitment. If you'll remember on the show at one point, we're talking about his tweet about, hey, anybody do a video for me? A lot of times that's the clarion call that kind of leads to an eventual commitment announcement. In Antwi's case, though, he has now decided to slow it down related to his recruitment. This is Kojo Antwi telling Jeff Sintel exactly why he made the decision to press pause for right now. This is Kojo.
I had second thoughts. I talked to my parents again. At first they were, supportive, about me making the decision and, the next week or so. But, I talked to them again, last week, and they were telling me, just let's pray about it and, take some more time because there's no need to rush. And, that period's about to be lifted, soon. So, let's just take our time and, you know.
So what you're looking for now is it visits are open and then you'll do the 3 or 4 visits you absolutely need to take, or what's that going to feel like for you?
Yeah, so I'm planning on making my decision on my mom's birthday, July 5th. So you know, that June month, I'm planning on taking, you know, 4 or 5 officials, you know, then making my decision in July.
So interesting stuff there from Kojo Antwi, sounding very confident that the dead period's about to come to an end, and therefore he wants to take some visits because of that. We're going to talk to Jeff Sintel, obviously, a lot more about this tomorrow. And one of the things we're going to get into with Jeff during that discussion is not just the visits that Antwi hopes to take, but what seems to be a little bit of recruiting momentum for Texas A&M in this recruitment. I think we did mention this with Jeff last week, that at one point in time you heard a lot of Georgia, Ohio State. It seems like now you're hearing less of Ohio State and a lot more of A&M. Exactly why is that? Antwi did get into this with Jeff. You can certainly listen to that at the DawgNation YouTube page. Great place to go and hear that. We'll talk to Jeff Sintel more about that tomorrow. I'm going to pass on giving out a golden shoe winner today because I want to give you an important update. A lot of you have been wondering, hey, you know, when is the podcast cool down going to begin? We've been doing a video version of that where we take comments. Tomorrow, big announcement related to the podcast cool down. So make sure if you're a podcast listener, you tune in for that. How about Gator Hater Countdown? Georgia, 233 days from now, get some revenge against Florida. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Have a great day, everybody. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. We'll call this the video cool down, I guess, because we're going to be doing this on podcast pretty soon, which I'm really excited about. I have a way that I think this is going to work. So if you're a Sometimes podcast listener, tune in for tomorrow, and I'll tell you a whole lot more about that. We will do that then. Interesting stuff from Kojo Antwi there at the end. Very provocative statements from Terence Edwards during the show, and of course the wild Zach Smith stuff off the top. So kind of an interesting run around here on all of this. I started on YouTube first yesterday. Let me see if I can get the Facebook comments to cooperate. We'll see if we can take some of those right now. And of course, we appreciate all of you being with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp today, and of course a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. Make sure you trust them. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. R.S. Andrews shows up on time, does the work that promised for the price that's promised. They'll take really good care of you. So let them do big things for you here today there as well. All right. Let's see what's going on here. Matt Rukavina says it's hard to believe that Zamir White's already a senior, kind of going back, thinking that it was just yesterday that he got injured with his ACL situation. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how quickly time flies. There is no question about that. Time flies quick. I have no idea why these Facebook comments have gotten so hard to load. Oh, what a disaster. All right, let me try my phone instead. Sorry. Nothing is ever easy. Everything is always hard. All right, on Facebook here for a moment. I hope all of you are doing well. There we go. Pete Williams agrees with Tennille Calvino. Agreeing with Tennille is always a good thing to do. Chad Williams wondering about the future of Carson Beck if he's not number 2. So the one thing that, I mean, Kirby's going to probably be no different than anybody else is going to be in that he's probably not looking to tip his hand as to who his number 2 quarterback is, maybe for the reason that you just mentioned, but also because when it comes to as important as something like this, in a year like this, backup quarterback could really matter for Georgia. We've seen backup quarterbacks play in the SEC in recent seasons. I would suggest that 15 practices and a G-Day, which the G-Day is probably more of kind of a glorified practice in its own right, but 15 practices is not enough to determine between Beck and Vandegrift or Bennett or whomever else in that competition. That's not enough to determine who the backup quarterback is going to be. So I don't believe there is any, well, this guy is backup quarterback now after spring. I just don't think you can get there in 15 practices. I think it's going to take more than that to kind of arrive at that point. But I understand the point you're making. Georgia's not necessarily immune to the same kind of transfer stuff other programs are dealing with and have dealt with, but I wouldn't put a rush job on trying to figure out who the backup quarterback is. I believe it's going to take longer than spring to finish that off. Matt Talley says the comments are also wonky on my computer. I'm all good. I'm all good. Thank you very much. My producer Michael Carvel bringing me his phone. My phone's kind of working fine. I would prefer to read them off the laptop for whatever reason, but That's apparently a bridge too far these days, so I'm going to go off the phone instead. But, Michael, thank you for bringing those in here. I appreciate that. Reggie Walker says, wonder if Zamir and Cook have the same chemistry as Chubb and Michelle had in their championship year. Yeah, chemistry is a great way to describe the way that Chubb and Michelle kind of played off each other that year, and kind of as that number 3 guy, DeAndre Swift. He was also getting, 95 carries or so, maybe a little less than that in his freshman season. So you had a nice chemistry between those guys, and looking for that same kind of chemistry to emerge with these guys this year, I do think it's worth paying attention to. Somebody is likely to be the odd man out, and that's just a fact. But some of this also gets determined by forces outside the control of Del McGee and Kirby Smart. Injuries a factor at running back, I say, for instance. And so these things do have a way of kind of working themselves out a little bit, but I love your description of the fact that in 2017, Chubb and Michelle had chemistry with each other. And I think that's really, I think it's a good way to say that. Scotty Gorup says, is G-Day going to be broadcasted like they used to be? Yeah, you should have regular TV for that. Now, whether it's ESPN or the SEC Network, I'm guessing it's more likely SEC Network. There will probably be a lot of spring games on April 17th. In fact, I know there's already, I think, at least 3 scheduled right now. That's going to be a pretty popular date for spring games. So, somebody maybe gets the ESPN nod, everybody else on the SEC Network. But you should get regular television for that. And I also believe I heard yesterday that the Georgia Pro Day, which is, I think, March 17th, is also going to be on television, too. So if you're looking to see Georgia on TV soon, Pro Day will give you a chance to do that as well. That is coming up. Chad Williams said, did Tank Bigsby go in the portal? No, there had been some rumors at one point in time that Bigsby might be looking to leave Auburn. But as it turns out, he's choosing to stay there, and I guess he's happy there. Mike Zambiasi says cover 4 tonight. There is no live cover 4 video tonight, but we'll be back to doing that, I believe, next week again. Jacob O'Neill wants to see me elbow drop the laptop. Yeah, I tell you, just one thing after another, folks. It is one thing after another. Steve Walden looking forward to seeing the offensive line develop. That's going to be one of the big stories of spring. There's no question about that. Very important to find those guys, and you may come a little closer to figuring out what that offensive line is going to look like, because you may hear some whispers about so-and-so spending a lot of time there during practice, things along those lines. So if you're looking for an area in which you may be able to get some resolution, maybe at left tackle is an example of a place you may get a chance to do that. SEC Dog on YouTube over here shouting out Dennis Wilson. I mentioned Dennis the other day. It looks like he's back with us again, which is nice to see. Frank Patterson says, I could easily give a rock bottom to the new mic stand. Yeah, I could probably do that. William Perry says, Mullen is so good for us. He says, meaning UGA, and he kind of gives a laugh about that. So I used to be of the belief that, I've said this before, that, it's been fairly commonly discussed within the context of our cool down here that, hey, if Mullen's going to win 8-9 games a year, that's not enough to be a threat to UGA. And it's also, maybe good enough to keep him employed there at Florida. So it's almost like the best of both worlds. You have a mediocre coach who remains employed. And I used to kind of buy into that line of thought a little bit. I think now I probably buy into it a little bit less, because last year you saw Florida catch lightning in a bottle and they beat UGA. And so when you allow something to fester, eventually it can become a nuisance. And I do believe that Dan Mullen last year became a nuisance. I mean, listen, it pains me to say this because I don't like the guy, and obviously I love being a Gatorade, but Dan Mullen out-coached Georgia a year ago. I mean, there's just no way around it. I don't know how you could say that. And injuries notwithstanding, and unsettled quarterback for Georgia notwithstanding, Florida ran the same wheel route over and over again, and Georgia never adjusted to that. So, I don't think you want a potential narrative like that to fester. I think you want to obliterate your chief competition in the SEC East, even if that eventually runs him out of his job. And as Matt Hayes has written for Saturday Down South, this is a win or walk year for Dan Mullen. I think it's Georgia's job to make him walk and, do business with whatever's left over after Dan Mullen's gone. I totally understand the point you're making. As long as you have mediocre recruiter, 4-loss season celebrated, that's kind of a safe place for Georgia to be. But, that doesn't take any of the onus off Georgia to go out there and just blow doors in that rivalry game this year, because, frankly, that's what they should have done in 2020 as well. Let's see what else. Frank Patterson says, dang, BA, he had 3 weeks off to prepare for us, plus we had 6 defensive players out. For me, though, all the things that you just mentioned are not enough of a mitigating factor to obscure the point that Georgia had a faulty defensive game plan that day. And, the guys that were out, to my eyes anyway, were not the guys getting beaten on the wheel routes. And I don't necessarily want to relitigate all of this, but, I mean, it's just the example of why if you have a chance to obliterate Mullen, which Georgia will have a chance to do this year, then you better make sure you do that, because the last thing you want is, look, if Mullen has a successful year with someone like Emory Jones this year, if they do make DeMarcus Bowman into a player, they haven't had a lot of success at running back, but if Bowman kind of follows in the footsteps of some of their previous transfers, all of a sudden that's a narrative that potentially grows legs, and you just don't want that to happen. If you have a chance to cut him off at the knees, that's exactly what I think that Georgia ought to strive to do. I'm not going to read Jay Shipe's comment, but I certainly laughed at it. I certainly laughed at that. Yeah, so Dennis Wilson is back in here again, stirring all this kind of trouble up. G. Grace Bama Boy also mentioning the Tua Tagovailoa injury situation. And I listen, I do think that's a little bit of a factor in how you evaluate him. That, it could be that he's just had a run of bad luck and a lot of different injury, situations. But man, that's a lot of injuries. And I don't quite know what you do with that. But I do feel pretty validated when I said going into last year's draft that I did not think that Tua Tagovailoa is a special player. The one thing that I said over and over again is when it comes to the Alabama offensive overhaul that took place during the time of Tua Tagovailoa's career, I always felt like Tua got more credit for that than he deserved. And the Alabama wide receivers, when they had all 4 of those big-time guys, really 5 if you want to count Jalen Waddle, when you had all of those elite receivers there at one time, those were really the guys that I thought should have gotten more credit for, kind of how that offensive transformation took place. I don't think they got enough of that credit. Let's see what else. Yeah, good to see. Throwing back to some old pickup games at the Johnson High School gym. Yeah, listen, I loved that. That was great times. Great times. Proud alumnus of Johnson High School, am I? And it's great to see you checking in the comment section today. That's a lot of fun to look back on and remember. Thank you for bringing that up. Thomas Tyson says, because I don't troll like the rest of y'all, I'd say it's too early to give up on Tua. But there was a reason there's smoke around Miami trading or drafting a quarterback. And that's the issue, Thomas, is, if you want to just look at it in a vacuum, is it too early to give up on Tua Tagovailoa? It probably is. But if you have a chance to go out and upgrade at quarterback, would you want to do that if you're Miami? For instance, you had a chance to trade for Deshaun Watson. Would you want to do that? Absolutely, I believe you'd want to. I mean, we have precedent for this. Arizona drafted Josh Wilson and not Josh Wilson. What is wrong with me? Josh Rosen, and then traded him the following year. So in the NFL now, there is a little bit of a freedom to say, if we didn't make the right pick on the right guy, let's not waste time pretending that we did. And I would say that in Arizona's case, having Kyler Murray has worked out way better. So if I was Miami and I had a chance to make a trade for one of these, big-time type guys, would I want to do that? I believe I probably would. I believe I would, even with the cost of bringing someone in, because sometimes in life you just sort of know, right? You know if you've got the guy, and maybe in Miami's case, especially with the way they chose to play Fitzpatrick last year, in Miami's case, they may just secretly know that Tua's not their guy. Frank Patterson says, who is our best run-blocking wide receiver right now? That's a really good question. I'll tell you this. I would not want to get run-blocked, if that's a proper use of that phrase. I would not want to get run-blocked by Kearis Jackson. I think the one thing that people maybe sometimes don't quite realize about Kearis is just how thick he is. Kearis looks a little bit like a running back. I mean, he's got some some stoutness to him for a receiver. So I imagine he probably lays wood fairly well. G. Grace defending Tua Tagovailoa. I figured you would have moved on to Mac Jones. He's about to be a first-round pick. I'm happy to see that you're still sticking up for Tua Tagovailoa. All I know, G, whether the trade rumors are true or not, I mean, it's obvious there were plenty of moments during the season in which Miami did not show full confidence in Tagovailoa. In acting like they have confidence in him now, I mean, obviously that's how you keep, morale high within the organization, but also Tagovailoa's value high outside the organization. But I have a sneaking suspicion that they're not 100% happy with Tua. But as you said, I'm also, viewing that from the outside perspective. Corey Doyle says, what are the chances that Alex Smith goes to the Bears? I guess I've heard some rumblings about that. Dennis Wilson. Dennis, you were worth waiting on, buddy. We haven't had your trolling here in a while, but he's in there trolling about Tyreek Stevenson. Yeah, good job tampering on that. Miami ought to be ashamed of itself. Let me go back over to Facebook here for a moment. Lucy Bowers-Boykin, good to have you here. Buck Brinson with a big prediction. He says, get ready for Air Kirby. Boy, that'd be fun to see. D. King brings up an interesting point. He says the Bama receivers seem to prefer Mac over Tua too. Yeah, was it Devontae Smith who didn't hesitate the other day to say that he thought Mac Jones was a better quarterback than Tua Tagovailoa? Now, obviously, if you have 1,800 yards receiving from that quarterback, that may be part of the reason why you think that's the case. But, Devontae also had some big years with Tua there as well. So that's actually a really good point, D, is that we've heard a lot of praise for Jones from some of these Bama receivers, Devontae Smith included. That's a good point. Alan McGovern says NFL is planning on full stadiums this season, so should college. And right now that's what college teams are planning on doing. But it's also one of those things where, it'd be a bigger deal if they were planning on not doing that, right? I mean, there's always a way to pump the brakes on all this kind of stuff. We've seen that before. But for now, I would say that's what they are planning on doing. And the one thing that these colleges are not going to do, I believe, is to be the first place to have full stadiums. They're just not going to be the first to do that. The NFL has the advantage of the fact their season starts a week after college does. And first of all, there's a lot of media that just sort of hates college football, so they'll use anything they can to, try to, stir up discord when it comes to that. So college needs someone to have full stadiums before. A lot of this is related to Major League Baseball, the push to have full stadiums, or at least, moving towards full stadiums in Major League Baseball. If that happens this summer, it makes it way easier for college football in the fall. Concerts, I've heard of some big, large-scale concerts that are apparently on plan for, July in the summer. That's a big deal. I've said this before, that Disneyland, Disneyland's the park in California. Disneyland's getting ready to open. Disney World has been open. But that's another large-scale gathering that when you have more of this kind of stuff going on, it just makes it a little easier to have bigger gatherings for college football. And putting aside for a moment what's healthy and safe and not, let's just say for the sake of conversation, it is safe. It is healthy. Vaccines rolling out, being outdoors, whatever reason you want to get to. For the sake of conversation, let's just say it's healthy. It's still hard to be the one that breaks the glass on that. It's still hard to be the entity, in this case college football, that leads the way on that. You want someone to go in front of you, and this summer gives you a chance to do that. Also, bigger crowds in the NBA as we head towards the end of the season probably helps a little bit there too. Let's see what else is on Facebook here for a moment. Joey Robinson asking about Darian Kendrick. Yeah, we talked about Kendrick during the regular show a couple of minutes ago. There is official reporting out there now from 24/7 that Georgia is in pursuit of Kendrick to go along with like Bama and I think Florida was mentioned there, like 5 schools, 3 of them in the SEC, 2 of them outside the SEC. So we do have some official reporting connecting Georgia to Kendrick, and we'll see if anything happens beyond that. Frank DiCarlo mentioned the Texas Rangers. Yeah, that's one of the Major League Baseball teams looking to be more aggressive on some of this kind of stuff right now. That's a really good point. Jimmy Durham also mentioning that as well. Any news on updates on a Rick Gilbert? No, Isaac. I'm guessing this Isaac Cruz that asks this. I'm guessing we're probably not going to hear much in the Gilbert front here for a while. I don't quite know what he's doing. I don't really know how much to read into more than rumors and the academic stuff. There have been sources close to the Florida program that essentially reported that's why he's not going to Florida. So take that for what you will. But at this point in time, I've kind of given up on the idea that I think that Gilbert may come to Georgia. I don't believe that's going to be the case. And at this point in time, I guess I'm not even all that certain he's going anywhere for this upcoming fall. He might. I don't have any kind of reporting on that, but based on the reporting that has been out there, my guess is it may be a little while before we hear about this. Let's see what else. A couple more on YouTube we're going to go. Somebody's in here talking to the South Carolina fans. I don't know who's in there stirring that part of it up, but that's kind of fun to see. All right, anything else before we go? DMart42 bringing up a pretty good point that back at Peach County days, Kyrus Jackson won the shot put and the 4x4 relay. So that's a pretty big-time athlete right there. That is a pretty big-time athlete. BD Hotnet also bringing up a pretty good point there as well, if I pronounce his name correctly, that don't discount George Pickens, the attitude that he brings. Pickens loves driving people into the turf. I've never seen somebody that loves that more. He's got good form, too. It's like his hands are inside, so he's not getting around for what can be a hole. He gets those hands inside, gets like right up underneath his shoulder pad, and he just drives to the turf. He's very good at that. He loves to do it. You're exactly right about that. Great physicality from him for sure. Great physicality. Some of y'all have some funny content, funny comments. All right, we're getting ready to go. We'll finish with this. William Carter says, who starts at left tackle? Jones, Mims, Truss. He says, who's your personal opinion? If I had to handicap it today, and this is just my personal opinion, I'll say Broderick Jones. That's my bet on this, my best guess on this for right now. I'd be curious to find out what you guys think about that as well, gals. You guys and gals think about that. My guess right now is Broderick Jones. At the moment, though, that is simply just a guess. But it's going to be a fun thing to watch here as we head towards the spring. All right, thank you all for being here today. Don't forget to check out the AJC for your Atlanta news now. You can find them online at ajc.com. Really interesting video presentation yesterday with a lot of the Atlanta area school superintendents about how they are dealing with the pandemic, different tacks being taken by different school systems around the Atlanta area. You can find out all of that. Details for that, of course, online, Atlanta News Now at ajc.com. Also, we're kind of at that 1 year mark of when the pandemic, I don't want to say officially began, but when we really started feeling the effects of that, obviously from a sports world standpoint, for sure. So there's a lot of retrospective look back and all of that. You can get some of that online, ajc.com there as well. And Max Fried got a chance to go in spring training action for the Braves yesterday. So we get an update on how Fried is doing as the Braves get ready for the start of the season. Very interesting race in the National League East this year. Obviously, big expectations from the Mets and the Nationals. Philly's got a little bit of love, at least from the betting market. You're seeing a little bit of Philly love out there, too. And then, of course, Atlanta trying to stay at the top there, winning that division for a fourth year in a row. So getting close in the Braves, pretty interesting stuff. Also, the Falcons got 3 compensatory picks yesterday. I don't remember. I think it's like 2/5 and a 1/6, if I'm right about that. But the facts, that's my best guess. I kind of halfway remember. But if you want to know for sure, check out the story from my buddy D-Led over there, Atlanta News Now, ajc.com. All right. Thank you all for being here today. Thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews Cool Down possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all that for you. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. Keep that in mind as we head towards the spring. Air conditioning units. I'm going to be working overdrive. Hot weather's on the way. So get the peace of mind that you need to know that your system is ready by getting it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. Thanks for being here on the R.S. Andrews Cool Down and DawgNation Daily presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m., everybody.